Good everything,
All
Prof.
right, there we go. Good everything. Yes. Just wanted to stop there where she made the profession and the proclamation. So yesterday you were in the Nubian streets, and let me just say, good everything. Did I say that? Yes. Love all the Nubians and those that are not. Love you too, and especially you, Dr. Carr. Hi.
Especially you. Hey, Prof. I was navigating as you have there on the latest of the fly gear, Nubian.
Navigate in them Nubian streets.
In the Nubian streets.
It says navigate the Nubian streets with care.
With care.
Yes.
Keep that mask on your wrist. I keep it on my wrist. Yeah, I was out there. I've been out there this whole week. I saw about a dozen of our folk who were going to Kemet on Wednesday when Dr. Black was in town with Black on Black. He had packed it out. But yeah, I was out there. How are you doing this beautiful morning? I love your glorious hair. Black women's hair is the crown and glory.
This is way too much information, but you know, the pandemic, my hairdresser moved to Georgia. So I'm like,
I'm leaving.
I was like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? Okay, gel and a hairbrush. That was my friend for the last 3 years. My hair was a mess. So I got like 8 inches cut off. I'm just like, all right, just do whatever. Please, thank you. Oh my God. But yeah, it was a whole mess. But y'all know what that is. But you know, head wraps and brushes and gel. I ain't doing the lace front because I need my edges. Yeah. But, no, edges are important. You know, they frame your face. You need.
Listen, edges never went out of style. In fact, these young sisters out here, they the edge queens. I'm like, really? This is a whole thing, huh? I just sit
now. That's baby hair. I'm like, I'm grown. I'm grown, so I'm not doing baby hair. But you know, if you do baby hair, that's your business. Everybody do what you want to do to make you happy.
Well, when you see those natural hair wigs in the Cairo Museum in Kemet, which of course, you know, a lot of times since it's so it's really a desert climate, the Kemites would shave their heads, but they would cut their hair and then weave it, braid it, lock it. And so when you see there's a whole case on the second floor of the Egyptian Museum of human hair wigs. And when we go up there, listen, and when y'all turn this corner, look at this case. Anybody ask y'all again, with Egyptians black? You just take a picture of this. And their hair in those cases is your hair. They're like, oh my God, the braids, the micro twists, all of it is there. 3,000 years old.
So should we feel some ways that we got somebody else's culture hair on our heads?
No. I mean, you know what? The interesting thing,
or more importantly, because that's irrelevant, that we don't even control the very industry that only we really propagate, right? We don't control that industry at all.
You know the answer to that. One of the earliest conversations we had, you brought up Annie Malone and Poro.
Yes, right.
And of course, Sarah Breedlove, the great Madam C.J. Walker, who said they told me in a dream how to fix black women's hair. So yeah, we need to be controlling that. And at one time, black women controlled it. So yes, you know that was one of the first conversations. He said, let's talk about Poro. Let's talk about Annie Malone. Come on now. Yes, so we know the answer to that. We can do anything we want to with our hair.
That's right. And I mean, can we just spend a moment? Because Adwa Asamoah, your sister, struck again. Texas now has the Crown Act because this woman is out in the streets making sure that how you show up with your hair grown out of your head will not make you lose your job and allow people to police your hair. That's right. She's been doing that work for the better part of a half a decade.
That's right. And it's so funny you say that. Of course, as you say, I was the one who introduced us. That sister from Connecticut, but her father, Kwame Batwa Asmoah, my brother, is of course Ghanaian and Ashanti. So it's so funny. One day Aj might show up with micro braids. Next thing she may show up and you blow from across the room and her hair will feather back. Like I said, is that a perm? She be ready to fight me. I ain't had a perm in my hair for years. I straightened my hair. So you can't. And her thing is, however you show up at work, black people, you supposed to be able to show up. Y'all not gonna cut this boy's locks so he can wrestle. Y'all not gonna fire this sister because her hair doesn't look like your hair. All of that. And that Crown Act, they've been waging battle. And she and her comrades from California, all the way back across over here to the East Coast, and then Texas.
Texas, of all places.
Well,
But
they just impeached the attorney general, right? The Ken Paxton, his wife is in the Senate, but they got that Crown Act passed. Don't mess with hair now.
right. But it also shows that, that may be a small thing, maybe, but it's a big thing. But everybody has their thing, right?
Yeah, of course.
We don't all have to do all of the things. Just find the thing that you do, right? And we need the thing. I was talking with an amazing sister the other day, and she said, like we all are body parts. Like I may be the neck, you may be the head, but that head ain't doing nothing without this neck. And when we come together, we need to know what our roles are. Am I a neck? Am I a head? Am I a hand? It's all important, right? Am I an eye? Am I the nose? Am I the nostrils? Like it's all in my nostril hairs. All important because it filters, so we just got to find our place, and do it.
That's such a powerful metaphor. There's a new play. Any of y'all in New York, if you are in New York, I think it opens tonight or tomorrow. I saw it in today's paper. Tori Sampson, this sister, has written a play called The Land Was Made. It is what is called a speculative account of the Black Panther Party's origins. There's the sister right there, drawing on roots of Black Panther. She grew up in a Panther household. Let me see where it says. The play, I think, the play which opens on Sunday at the Vineyard Theater in Manhattan. The reason I bring it up is because one of the narrator of the play, and here, he got a real write-up, long write-up in the Times. There you see the brother playing. He was the sister from who plays Bumpy Johnson's daughter in Godfather of Harlem. She's in here. Yeah, so but she says that the narrator comes in and says that I am the griot. As she comes in to narrate the history. And of course, they talk about the Shakur family. Actually, there's a new book Santee Holly just wrote called An American Family, The Shakurs and the Nation They Created. This just came out on Tupac Afeni Shakur, but more importantly, the entire, we talked about Mutulu Shakur a couple of months ago, some of the things. But anyway, I raise it because the narrator, opens the play or somewhere near the play, opening of the play. The narrator says, I'm a griot. And I winced because we should just get rid of that French word. I understand it's familiar now and it's better than saying storyteller, but the word jolly is very important because jolly means blood. And as you say, to know your part of the body that you function, we need everything in our bodies to function, but the blood is what literally allows our body to function. And if we think it metaphorically, we don't have a body without memory. That's why they call the memory keepers the blood. There is no body without memory. So, I just thought about that because that's going to be germane to what we're going to talk about.
Everybody wants to be the head. Who wants to be the blood? Ooh, raise your hand.
Well, the blood is going to be hard because
you have to earn that, right? You have to earn it.
Oh, yes.
I was talking with Evie Zaboy this week.
Yes, our sister.
Yes. And, we were talking about this very thing of memory and reclaiming because, she changed her name since you were talking about the Shakurs. Of course, there were the Africas in Philly,
That's
and
right.
at every stage, there's an attempt to remember, come into community, change the name. Evie changed her name. She had a French name because she's from IT, her parents.
Indeed.
And even talking about God and religion because she was, Catholic. Catholicism was forced into, and right now the biggest Catholics are in Africa and in the Caribbean islands. It's like it's crazy, and we don't even question or challenge anything. And there's no disrespect if you don't wince, run headlong into liberation. And that was what she said. And she's still battling her folk, but this is something that once you gotta do something different. So I know.
Once we know, it's like we were talking about last week when Governor Moore, Wes Moore, gave the commencement speech at Morehouse Sunday before last and said, I know my full history. And he talked about opening with the day he was inaugurated. He started the ritual that morning. That's what he told the assembled faculty and students and families at Morehouse. And if y'all go to Morehouse's YouTube channel, you can see the whole speech. And I encourage you to. He said, we started that morning at the water at Annapolis. And anybody who's been to Annapolis, if you ever go right to the port there. There is a museum there, African American Museum, and right off the shore there. And it's a little port. They got little shops and things like that. And you think, oh, that's cute. And there's a statue of Alex Haley. The reason there's a statue of Alex Haley there is because that is the place that is said to have been the place where the ship that brought Kunta Kinte in from Gambia came, what is now the Gambia. And Governor Moore told those young people that Sunday morning, he said, we started the ritual there. And I know they were mad, but I used my full hit. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's not your full history, but I see what you mean. So, and I understand you can't go but so far on your way to the White House. So that's fine. But please understand that some things, I don't know if they can be reconciled. So if you're going to be a memory keeper for African people, there are going to be some unpleasant, challenging conversations. And that's not the reason you're having them. You're having them because you have to be true to long distance memory if you're really going to talk about our full history, I think.
And let me say this. How do you know how far we can go unless we go there, right? So, I mean, if not for Town, Jesse Jackson very easily would have won that primary.
How about that?
I'm looking at what's happening. The Little Mermaid, y'all big mad, don't matter. The fourth largest grossing Memorial Day movie of all time. And Laurie Daniel Favors walked through some of the issues she had with it. But by and large, that was us showing up. But everybody's showing up because the world right now is like, okay, this culture, you could be, it's allowed, they call it the silent majority, right? So the people you hear out there flapping their gums and running their mouths, they don't represent the majority of us. And so we get twisted in our minds that, oh, they're not going to let us. Who's they? And then who's us, right? Because as far as I can see, when we show up and do the things that we need to do, the world has to follow. They have to. There's like, when we come together, it has to, because it's righteous, right? So I don't know that, him, I don't even feel like he has to, but I think the work for us is to just constantly remember. Because I feel like we're still, a lot of us, operating in our ignorance and operating in our indoctrination and thinking that the little bit of things that we're doing, the little, baby steps that we're taking towards freedom and liberation, that, somehow I got a little bit of it, so I know everything. And we don't sit in that soil enough, or sit with these ancestors enough, or listen enough to really just fully get there and then have power, But
it's true.
It's coming.
Well, I mean, yeah.
I mean, even the media. I mean, you think about, like, you talk about jailbreaking the universities, or us being here on a Saturday, Roland being where he is. Like, I just saw Jamel Hills, going through her thing with Spotify.
I was thinking, I was waiting to hear this, what you thought about it. I know you talked about Unc over there with Skip. You said that's a power move. What is that? What should we take from these?
First of all, we need to stop allowing them to sit us with mediocre people who diminish the message. And I get it. It's theater, there's WWE, it's all of that. But even in WWE, there was some leveling. You were battling equals.
It's the Rock and Steve and Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's not the Rock and some.
Why you got me sitting with this twerp? Which is an actual thing. So y'all can look up the definition, and it's accurate.
Drip Bayless. What?
Yeah.
Who? What?
Why? How? Who? How do you need to know? Why? But we keep perpetuating this mediocrity, and then it gets emboldened because the indoctrination goes both ways. He thinks he deserves to be there, to sit across from this Hall of Famer, to have these conversations, to have these opinions, because he was a journalist sitting in the same seat of mediocrity, judging people with no talent, no abilities whatsoever. What gives you the right to question what anybody is doing that you can't even do? You can't even conceptualize this. But this is the world that we live in, and we accept it because that check is good, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting that check, so I'm gonna keep quiet. I'm gonna validate this. But we know we're validating it, right? And I don't know all of the details of Jamel Hill's situation, so I'm not even going to talk about it. But I do know that Joe Rogan did somewhere in the ballpark of $200 million. And in her mind, like, until you give somebody black, now I don't know if you can force somebody to do that, which you can't, which we're seeing. So my thing is, if your thing is popular, Club Shay Shay is popular. He's taking that with him. We still going to watch Club Shay Shay. He got 1.6 million subscribers to it. And folk are going to watch him when he sits down and talks with people, because we like generally, or don't like, but we're going to tune in to Shannon Sharp. Jamel, you don't need, maybe you need to check, maybe you don't. But I feel like as long as we're chasing checks, we're always going to be in bondage. Checks are chains, right? Other people's checks.
Ooh,
Other
checks
people's
are
checks.
chains. Other
Yeah.
people's checks are chains. Other people's checks are chains. It's interesting. Yesterday, I was on my way to a bookstore. I was hunting for something, and I stopped to get a cup of coffee, and somebody called my name. Said, "Carr." One of my former students from Howard. She was a student maybe about 16, 17 years ago. I think she graduated, she said, in 06, 07. And we were talking. She actually works for Warner Brothers. And she's usually on the West Coast. She was here in town to do some things. She said, we have an office on this coast. So I asked about the writer's strike. And she says, it's very interesting because, of course, Warner Brothers, she says, has one of, if not the highest paid executive CEO or whatever. And she said, but I'll be quite frank with you, Dr. Carr, the future is here. And the future is direct to consumers. The future is direct to consumers. She said, they don't know what to do right now. Because and so, and I'm thinking about us in particular, and as this summer unfolds, and we venture off into some new things. I've been talking, for a couple of years about this intellectual CSI, going to sites and doing places. We control this, and to be in a space like Wednesday when I went over to Anacostia, Southeast, as they say in DC, and then going to Busboys and Poets over there on Martin Luther King Avenue. And, I walked in about 5 minutes after everything started, and Dan Black was already in full power play. And the place, it was
in blackness,
full blackness. And the place was literally shoulder to shoulder. I just stood up in there for like an hour and a half. And then after it was over, and he was signing books. I mean, at least a dozen Nubians who are going to Kemet were there. There were folk who had come down from Delaware. There are folk who were in town from the West Coast. There were folk. This is not regulated. So when the young sister yesterday was telling me, this is somebody who is near the living, beating heart of this whole franchise of image making. You talk about the Little Mermaid. You talk about, those are concessions. Those aren't,
right.
They're only doing that because they're trying to attract our eyeballs. But what we're doing right now, this is maroons, but we are completely And she said, that's it. It's direct. It's direct now. They don't know what to do.
But we have a model, right?
We have a model. Yeah.
The 102nd commemoration of the decimation of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It was May 31st, and it took 2 days for them to level something that took forever to build. But I think about we talked our very first conversation about Ida B. Wells in the People's Grocery Store.
Right.
You big mad, right? You big mad because you brought us here to build, and that's what we do.
That's what we do.
But your job is to separate us from our memory of who we are, right? And as long as we don't know that, and that we can have to go to you to eat. Why do we have to go to you to eat? We know how to plant seeds. We brought seeds in our hair. We don't need you to eat. We don't need you to do anything. And we definitely don't need you to educate each other. We don't need you to serve each other. We don't need you to love each other. So let's stop using that model of chasing that, right? And again, I sit as somebody that didn't take a check to build something that I'm extremely proud of, but it can be done, right? You gotta be strategic about it. You get your little coin and your benefits from to steady job, and then go out there and build in your community. Take the check, but be strategic about taking the check. The check ain't the end. No. And even if they give you $10 million, that's you. What about us?
Well,
good, okay, you're all right.
This who is we keeps threading through it. I mean, who is it for? Are we building a we? And there are going to be some very difficult conversations. I think this isn't a question of motive. This isn't a question of courage. I'm talking now strictly in terms of governance, who we are to each other. And I'm talking in the most expansive sense. Whether we agree, disagree, we are all caught up in a system that is based on taking our labor for its purposes. So this isn't, and what I'm about to say now isn't really about whether we agree or disagree on how best to free ourselves. Because some people believe in freeing themselves individually or them and their people, and then that's an example, and you follow me. We're not talking about that right now. But one thing is clear: this system is not going to go quietly. And as it sees us recovering some form of momentum of memory, it's going to fight like hell to dictate what that memory looks like and who that memory serves. So when you mentioned Tulsa, for example, there's a new book. This young brother, Victor Luckerson, is just because even now we talk about Black Wall Street, we talk about Tulsa. This is why in our African States framework, movement and memory is extremely important. All those categories are important. I think today we're probably going to talk more about movement and memory. Movement and memory, of course, we remember asked the question, that conceptual category asks the question, how did or do African people remember or narrate whatever experience we're talking about? Not how the social structure narrates it, but how do we narrate it? We lift 1921 Tulsa. We lift the Red Summer of 1919, not to reenact the trauma, but to remember what we have fought through, what we have faced, and how we have persevered. Now, Tulsa, the social structure almost wants to concentrate Tulsa on the trauma.
Of course.
And skip over the century since. This new book by this brother, Luckerson, is called...
So you just happen to have that, sir?
No, yeah. Built from the Fire, right? Because it just came out. Like, I got this book maybe about 3 days ago. The epic story of Tulsa's Greenwood District, America's Black Wall Street, 100 years in the neighborhood that refused to be erased. This book talks about pre-Tulsa Black Wall Street, Tulsa Black Wall Street, and then, hence the title, Built from the Fire, everything that has happened since. In fact, he says, and I'll just read from the inside jacket, when Ed Goodwin moved with his parents to the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1914, his family joined a growing community on the cusp of becoming a national center of Black life. But just 7 years later, on May 31st, 1921, hence the anniversary we just passed, the teenage Ed hid in his bathtub as a white mob descended on his neighborhood, laying waste to 35 blocks and murdering as many as 300 people. Tulsa Race Massacre goes on. Then he says, but that was never the whole story of Greenwood. Again, jolly, blood. How do you keep the we going? Movement and memory. How did or do Africans remember that experience? Yes, May 1921. What about June 1921? July 1921? What about May 1931, May 1941, 51, 61, 71, 81, 91, 01, 11, 21, 100th anniversary of Tulsa? Yeah, but there was 100 years in between. The jacket goes on to say, the Goodwins and their neighbors soon rebuilt it into a Mecca. In Ed's words, where nightlife thrived, small businesses flourished, and an underworld economy lived comfortably alongside public storefront. Prosperity and poverty intermixed, and icons from W.E.B. Du Bois to Muhammad Ali ambled down Greenwood Avenue alongside maids, doctors, and every occupation in between. I'm mentioning that because when we did talk about this a couple of years ago, we talked about those things. We talked about using some of the literature that's out there. Everything that has happened since goes on to say Ed rose to become a prominent businessman and bought a newspaper called the Oklahoma Eagle to chronicle Greenwood's resurgence and battles against white bigotry. He and his wife, Jeannie, raised an ambitious family, and their son, Jim, an attorney, embodied their hopes for the civil rights movement in his own work. But by the 1970s, urban renewal policies had nearly emptied the neighborhood, even as Jim and his neighbors tried to hold on to it. Today, while new high-rises and encroaching gentrification risk wiping out Greenwood's legacy for good, the family newspaper remains. And Ed Goodwin's granddaughter, Regina, represents the neighborhood in the Oklahoma State Legislature, working alongside a new generation of local activists. This book is 656 pages. Black Wall Street. Hold on. What happened in the century since? Jolly. Movement and memory. How did, and here, and I'll end with this. Well, let me mention one other thing. July 4th this year, July 4th, 2023, a book will be released that is being published by Mocha Media. That book is by our sister, our elder, a sister who she and her brother, Ajua, and her Ghanaian and Ghanaian American community at the Ghana embassy a couple of months ago gave them Ghanaian citizenship. And of course, we talking about Mother Fletcher. Mother Viola Ford Fletcher's book by Mocha Media will be released, and it's called Don't Let Them Bury My Story. the oldest living survivor of the Tulsa massacre, in her own words. In other words, y'all acting like this happened in 21, and then you skip all the way over it. And hey, I loved Watchmen. Regina King ripped the frame out. Hey, excuse me, but I'm still here. You're not gonna bury. And hey, you see this right here? I got a U.S. passport. See, this is an American story. Hold on, what's that? Just the Ghanaian passport. See, what y'all don't understand is it's one thing to have the momentum of a century of memory. Let's try a momentum of 10 or 100 centuries of memory. That's what y'all scared of.
Yeah.
You ain't scared of 1619 project. You scared of 1619 BC project. Coming out. Oh my God.
Come on. And for me, when I look at Black Wall Street, I think of a generation out of enslavement building something so enviable that they had to firebomb an entire community of people because they had the audacity to say what you not gonna do. And then all they could respond with was violence, right? The audacity of these Negroes, and why do you have a piano, and how come you have airplanes, and why I don't have anything because I'm mediocre and I've been told I'm supposed to have everything, and I've never worked, never had to work a single day to earn any of this. So for me, it's always what we have done, we can do. And if we take that back 1,000 years, what we have done, we can do.
Yes.
So the question is like Jesus saying, you could do greater things than I've done. Well, I ain't walked on water yet or turned water into wine, but I guess I can.
Look, I'm not sure we ever had to do, because the more we study, the more we realize, oh, we did that before. This is the lesson.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you. I saw you out in the Nubian streets, being safe at the Arlington Cemetery.
Had to go.
It was nice. So those of you who follow Dr. Carr on Twitter, and I'll actually drop the link of that and the YouTube of.
I thought about you. I thought we should go live, and I thought I had to fight all these people out here. Although the Black people out there, we all cool. I love going to Arlington because, as you can imagine, the class structure is real. The people who are in security, waving people through, the people selling tickets, the people driving up and down. They got 250 landscapers alone. I ain't talking about the plumbers. I stopped and talked with two brothers who were in the plumbing truck to make sure I was going the right way. I'm saying it ain't Black people out there, aren't it? So I'm sure, but if I had tried to live stream, I'm sure they would have been like, yo, man, I'm just letting you know they're gonna come around here in a minute. But I said, no, I'll just capture a couple of minutes because I knew we were coming here and anticipating this summer. There's going to be a lot more of that. We're going to do a lot more of that. And then
I appreciate it. It was wonderful. So that not a weed in sight, not a weed in sight.
Oh, no, it's immaculate. Oh my goodness.
This weekend, this past Sunday on CBS Sunday Morning, which, you know, right up there with 60 Minutes, they at least they do some good journalism. They had a piece on all of the forts that are now being renamed that folk are calling woke or whatever. So Fort Bragg, and it's interesting, Dr. Carr, like I never thought, you know, when you drive down south, you see all of the forts as you're coming down, you never think these are Confederates. You couldn't imagine that these things were named after losers and traitors.
You are African from Jersey. I'm African from Tennessee. We knew they were Confederates, but what we didn't know was the contempt we should have for those Confederates, because it was normalized to us.
Right.
But yeah. Oh yeah, no question. No
Whole
question.
Streets, Bobby Jones. I'm like, what the hell? You know, now, you know, it's like, this must go. So it's like, well, you're changing our culture, and yes, it needs to be changed. Y'all celebrating heroes.
Well, you can keep it. We're just gonna leave you. See, we got to get the good sense to walk away from our abusers. Y'all gonna figure out in a minute. We in an abusive relationship called United States of America.
So Fort Bragg is now Fort Liberty, which is great. And then I had to go down a rabbit hole. Like, who the hell was Fort Bragg? Who was Bragg anyway? Like, why is this person even Braxton Bragg? Who is Braxton Bragg? Warrington, North Carolina, West Point, all of that. Oh, okay. So he was elevated to the Army of Mississippi, later in your backyard, known as the Army of Tennessee, Brigadier General.
That's right.
So he was fighting against America. And
but
then
he went to West Point. Robert E. Lee went to West Point. General Oliver Howard went to, all them boys was together. And then they chose up sides in 1861. This is the thing people don't understand, which is why the first two funerals held in the new amphitheater at Arlington National Cemetery were for Confederate soldiers. The United States government made a decision. No, come on back, because I'm going to mention this right quick. The U.S. government made a decision that to gesture toward and symbolize national healing. The first two soldiers they would have a formal funeral at Arlington for were Confederates. When y'all go to Arlington National Cemetery, you go up to that plantation house built by Africans called Arlington House, go around the corner and then go up that hill. There is a huge Confederate monument there. Right across the street from the little plaque for the Buffalo Soldiers that Colin Powell was responsible for. And there are about 100 and I forget how many, no, maybe 1250 U.S. colored troops buried in another section, section 27 of them. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a Confederate monument up there. And there are Africans on that monument. People say, well, they were black people who fought for the Confederacy. No, they were enslaved Africans who were conscripted into the Confederate Army. And when they built that monument, in fact, there's a remember, Prof, again, y'all, if you are in narrative, and if you're a newbie, that means you're in narrative. If you're watching this later and not in either one of those, understanding our vast archive, which is vast now and growing, we just getting started. We did a whole conversation when we talked about the Daughters of the Confederacy, and there's a picture on the cover of one of the books on the Daughters of the Confederacy with that Confederate monument that is in Arlington Cemetery. The first two soldiers that they had a funeral for out there in the amphitheater were Confederate soldiers. So brag, it's not a mystery why these things are named for these Confederates. Why? Because this country, they called it redemption in the 19th century after Reconstruction. We have to study the Reconstruction movement. We also have to study redemption, meaning what? They have a narrative. They have jollies. And we think somehow, oh yeah, Black history is American history. It's progress. We built this country. It's progress. No, you are poisoning your blood. These people have an agenda. If you want to be part of their body politic, you know your body part. You can guess what your body part is. Anyway.
And on that, right? Because to that point, I was just thinking about water being poisoned. You know, we call this a clean glass of water, but every day we're drinking poisoned water and forced to have to try to live with it, right? And that every day is an assault on our young people who don't know, right? We're in schools where you're being taught things or not being taught things. Your school may be named for somebody. You have to walk down the street. If you're in the South, you have to see Confederate flags. And you're never told that is the flag of a traitor. That is a flag of a loser. You're told that's heritage, right? And the gaslighting is vast. It's deep. It's wide. And so I question, Dr. Carr, whether these folk that are out here gaslighting, whether they even know, because generations, as you mentioned, I didn't even think about, they have jollies too, right?
Oh,
generation to generation, they've been conditioned to believe that this is the truth, but it's really not, right? No more voting Jesus is white.
Let's ask it. Is it not the truth?
It's
in other words, what is the function of narrative? In other words, when we start talking about truth, and like Dr. Obenga would always say, you got knowledge by fact, knowledge by opinion, knowledge by faith. Fact would also maybe knowledge by reason. It is a fact that the states of the Confederacy seceded from the Union and fought a civil war. But the opinion comes in with how to make meaning of that. So when you bury those first two Confederate soldiers, when you do a funeral for them, now they weren't the first two bodies buried there, but when you do that, are you of the opinion that it is more important to keep the United States going than anybody's individual or group grievance? In other words, the fact is y'all fought, but how do we interpret that fact? So when people say truth, I'm wondering how we do. Du Bois fought with that his whole life. We're going to talk about Du Bois and his friend Charles Young in a minute. When Du Bois writes in The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, his doctoral dissertation, they turn into a book. And at the end, he says the important moment to correct a moral wrong is the moment it occurs. Because if you let it linger, it's going to turn to something else. He said nobody would have looked with more horror at the Civil War than George Washington and them. But if you had looked at what they set up, it was inevitable that this was going to happen. So when we fast forward to today, and we say we're going to tell the truth, are we? Is the truth the same? Isn't it?
Obviously not. Obviously, we have different truths, but the reality is the fact. They fought.
Fact is the reality.
They succeeded.
That's right.
And fought against the United States of America, which makes them what? Traitors?
Well, they fought against the federal government because they would say they were fighting for the United States of America. You understand? The Confederate States of America's concept was they were being true to the federal Constitution. In other words, they said that what the federal government is attempting to do is deprive us of our ability to be free. Slavery is written into this document. There's no 14th Amendment. There's no 13th Amendment. There's no 15th Amendment. When they seceded, they're like, why are y'all interfering with us? The problem they had was us. In other words, we had a truth. Our truth is, forget y'all. As I'm walking through Arlington National Cemetery and I'm looking at these tombs and I'm looking at these headstones, I'm wondering, and I'm going to use this metaphor because I think it's entirely appropriate. How in the hell am I supposed to look at George Washington differently than any sane human being would look at Adolf Hitler? I want somebody to answer that for me. I'm asking a very serious question now. I'm a person of African
descent. Don't do it, Miss Seeley. Don't do it. It ain't perfect.
No. Arlington is a plantation. Arlington was a plantation. Professor Hunter, I tell you, one of the things I always love to do is to go into spaces, into public spaces like that, because as I said, the laboring classes in those spaces are our people. So it's Black people. Brothers working in the bookstore, sisters selling tickets for the ride, for the trams going around, brothers and sisters wanding people, ushering what seemed to be 100 or 300 or 500 million middle school and high school students. and I'm not one to normally announce myself, so I'm trying to be low key. But for some reason, I'm saying I'm going to see Charles Young. So I felt I wasn't really in a very charitable mood. So I rocked one of my Paul Laurence Dunbar shirts. And this is the Black Studies Matter shirt. You know what I'm saying? I was rocking my Black Studies Matter shirt with the Carr G. Woodson and Paul Laurence Dunbar on the back from Nubia Garima and them. When I tell you, when I came through there, at least, I don't know, 7 or 8 of these security guards, the sister selling tickets, as I'm walking up the hill, one of the brothers who worked there, love that shirt, bro. Love that shirt, bro. And then I'm walking up by where John Kennedy is buried, the Kennedy family. And this old white woman's like, I just want to tell you how much I love that shirt. I'm like, well, thank you. It's a different thing, though, right? And I'm going back to get on the train, and the brother who's directing traffic into the parking lot, he said, hey, man, what can I get one of them shirts? I said, you got to go to a Dunbar High School website in D.C. You know, over in Northwest, they got a Carr Woodson Academy. He said, oh, thank you, man. I'm saying that to say that there are competing memories. And I'm saying, to me, George Washington, why would I look at Washington different than I would look at Hitler? I'm an African person. This was a plantation. George Washington's step-grandson built the house. No, I'm sorry. What am I saying? See, this is that stupid stuff Black people talk about. We built the country. No. George Washington's step-grandson, Custis, ordered Africans to build what is now Arlington House. That boy's father, who was Martha Washington's son with her first husband, George Washington's so-called stepson, is the one that purchased the land, and they used to call it Mount Washington. George Washington's step-grandson's daughter, Mary, she the one married Robert E. Lee, her distant cousin, because you know that's how they get down. And that's how Robert E. Lee, who was the grandson of a governor of Virginia, ended up being the master of Arlington Plantation. So there will be no reconciliation for me. I'm saying if this were a cemetery started by Nazis, with Nazi founding, if I'm not only someone Jewish, but someone who has common humanity with Jews, which would include originally the Beta Israel, the Ashkenazim, the Ethiopian Jews included. Let's not even talk about what they do to Ethiopian Jews have done over the years in Israel, but let's set that aside for a minute. How am I supposed to frame Goebbels and Goering? How am I supposed to frame them?
Wow. You know, because of our education system, when you said that originally, I was like, ooh, he has stepped in something.
I'm just wondering, because Charles Young is going to bring all this to light.
Okay, let's go, because
I'm helping because I'm really trying to publish that.
You have said something that I'm forced to sit with, because you know he couldn't tell a lie and he chopped down a cherry tree, and he's the father of this country, and I'm an American, so I have to work through all of that to arrive at the place that you've arrived at logically, and it's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable.
So thank you.
Well,
I was sitting in this discomfort for a minute, because you can't dispute it. Yes.
But I mean, what do we do with it?
We don't even talk about own a judge and all. You know, we're not even talking about the audacity to try to force somebody back into enslavement. We're not even talking about the teeth in his head that he literally took out the mouths of enslaved people. We're not even talking about the teeth that we were told were wooden teeth, but were actually the teeth of the enslaved. We're not going to talk about any of that, but you just laid that and gave a nice
No,
bridge to
I
walk over.
really am wondering because for me, of course, I look at him the same way. Of course, I look at him the same way. For people who don't, I respect your humanity, your opinion, but I also would not allow you to narrate our history because you are not a Jolly. For African people, you're an American Jolly. And I can respect that because we all get to choose how we want to. And ultimately, an American Jolly who brings up the question will ultimately have to uh, acknowledge the fact and confront the fact that this clash is inevitable. It cannot be reconciled unless it can be reconciled. Because if you're saying I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, or I believe in our common humanity, so that there is no sin, if you believe in that, if you got that way of knowing, that can't be forgiven, then you got to forgive Hitler.
Oh, Jesus. And I put Jesus in there. So
I'm saying, but if that's your way of knowing, see, I'm not from that way.
Right. So there, as you walk through Arlington Cemetery, because you've done this with,
Many times.
with Medgar Evers and his brother, like there are some people listening right now whose family members are there. For them, it is sacred, that land.
Why is it sacred?
Because their family is there.
Exactly. Not because George Washington is there, because your uncle is there, because your auntie is there, because your uncle who was in the army and his wife is there. It's sacred because Medgar Wiley Evers is there. And it is sacred because Thurgood Marshall and Joe Louis are there. It is sacred because Benjamin O. Davis is there. It's sacred because Charles Ada Young. It's not sacred because George Washington, that was a plantation for George. It's not sacred because those Confederates. So see, this is what I'm saying. These are dueling memories, and it's only in polite agreements to not talk about it that we get here. Look, I got all the respect in the world for my friend Nicole Hannah Jones. The 1619 Project was on ABC. It was a major event in the social structure. That's great. Now, of course, I'm not gonna sit out. I encourage everybody to watch, but my thing is, I'm not trying to get in this story. So every time somebody says we helped build this country, I'm like, so you want credit for being someone who helped in a settler? They brought you here. So are you going to tell me that the German economy, the originators of the Volkswagen, those who pioneered rocket science technology, you want credit because you were experimenting on in concentration camp? Do you know every one of these plantations was a death camp? We helped build this country. What the hell are you talking about? But guess what? No harm, no foul, because even you talking about it's going to create discomfort. If Amanda Gorman's going to write a poem, The Hill We Climb, that's fine. Now, I mean, Elizabeth Alexander did her poem for Obama. Maya Angelou did her poem for Bill Clinton. And,
yes.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. I mean, now, if you put them together, I wouldn't necessarily rank them in the top billion of great poems in public, but they were all for presidents, so that makes them significant. And now you want to ban this young sister's book in Florida. Why? Because
you can't read, and you thought it was okay.
You can't read anyway, and you don't read no poetry anyway.
She doesn't read. She hasn't read a single book.
No,
that filled out the form.
No, but that's the whole thing. She's not fighting anything Amanda Gorman said or wrote. She's fighting Amanda Gorman.
Right.
Which means she's fighting Karen Hunter and Greg Carr and everybody else. I'm fighting you. And here's the thing. My response would be, I am much more concerned, lady. Well, two responses. What you think about me doesn't matter to me at all unless it impacts public policy. And at this point, I'm going to roll over you like water once we understand that we don't have common interests. But the second thing is, I'm much more concerned about the shadow ban. I'm much more concerned about the shadow book ban than the one they're trying to enact. You know what the shadow book ban is? Before she filled out that form, were there copies of The Hill We Climb in the library? If the answer is yes, the question is, when the last time one was checked out? You know what a shadow ban is? When you have a book and don't read it. People say they banned our books. When the last time you went in the library and checked out a book? Let's be clear. The shadow ban is what we need to be terrified of, because we ain't even reading the books that we can get. Now we're going to get up and this is the thing. We get to dictate, if there's a we, in our governance formation, we get to dictate who is the most valuable. Who is the most, in fact, in a minute,
and thank you. While you looking, I just want to reiterate, I had the audacity and the ignorance to try to put together 100 books Black people should read as a canon. And then sitting here with you every Saturday, how in the hell can any one person make that decision? No, So I had to back up because I started. I was asking everybody, all the authors, what are your favorite books? So I have a collective. But I was like, that's so what this social structure does. And consensus and okay, so everybody thinks Malcolm X autobiography that should be in it, and then man, I gotta have something for children. And I'm sitting there like, who am I? I had to like check my own my own ego at the point. Like,
no, I think it's important, Prof. I don't think so. I mean, I think let me just from my perspective, that is important work, depending on where it comes from and who's doing it. You're not the New York Times, although your name has appeared there many times, either in front or next to. You're not the social structure media. You're a governance media, and convening conversations like that are important for us because even if we agree or don't agree, how untold people will say, "Oh, I didn't know about that book."
right.
And somebody say, "Oh, I'm gonna read this." Oh, I didn't like this.
Instead of being the top 100, I think there should be a rolling list of books that are,
That's true, but some books are more important.
Yeah, but
some books are more important.
One person say, "Here are the 100 books," because you've seen those lists. 100 books you must read before you die. 100 movies it's like the top 10 of all time, and like who gets to determine that?
Well, I mean, hopefully, as we recover our sanity, if we're going to in fact do that, 1,000 years from now, I don't know that anything written by African people in the United States in the last several hundred years would make a top list, because hopefully that trauma, we might pick a couple to document the trauma. Maybe Souls of Black Folk, maybe Miseducation or something but we beyond that. But I tell you a book that would be on there, or a text that would be on there would be Ptahhotep from 2,500 so-called BC, 4,500 years ago. In other words, there are narratives that endure for their quality, for their vision. But I don't know that anything by Lorraine Hansberry or James Baldwin, I don't know anything that would be, I don't know that because those things are things that document our persistence, our resilience, our questioning, but the social structure that called them into existence, that willed them into existence because we had to resist, that having been triumphed over, this is what E. Franklin Frazier raised near the end of his life in the article, in the little essay he wrote called The Failure of the Negro Intellectual. He said, I went to this international conference of Black people, and they're talking about the deeper questions of humanity and society. They're talking about, the nature of human society and how we can change it, the threats that face us as a group of people, as a species. He said, and what I noticed was these Africans from the Caribbean and from Africa and from talking about, he said, and the American Negro, the U.S. Negro, we were talking about the race problem. He said, and that's when it dawned on me. The Negro intellectual is obsessed with the smaller questions, which we have to be obsessed with. But and I think that's where a lot of this whole question of Black excellence and Black joy and this, I get the impulse for that, but please, it's still informed by the trauma. So 1,000 years from now, it may be the things that we produce that speak to the joy of our humanity out of our cultural experiences that will survive. You know what I'm saying? It may not even be the book, it might be the music.
1,000 years from now, if we're still talking about that, then there's
we're in trouble.
Failure.
Well, we won't even be, because the AI will have already sourced us for that's right.
Well, we might be here because of the AI. I don't know.
No question. Well, definitely the AI, not artificial intelligence, alien intelligence. Alien is in anti-human, as in Europe, and its machinations of race is an alien intelligence. But let's talk about Charles Young. Let's do that. In fact, what we saw at the beginning there, when we saw a descendant of now Brigadier General Charles Young accepting the promotion, a promotion which actually has its roots in Africans fighting for that while Charles Young was alive. We talked about Charles Young last week, but I want to say a few more things about Young. In fact, before I say anything else, let me just read from a poem by County Cullen. Charles Young made transition in 1922 in Nigeria. We'll talk about that in a minute. His funeral in Nigeria by the Nigerian soldiers and the British, they were, of course, being colonized by the British at the time, but Black hands lowered Charles Young's oak casket into the earth there in Nigeria, in Lagos. And it was Black hands that disinterred him a year later in 1923, May 1923, because the British, these criminals, had a rule that if you were buried in their protectorate called Nigeria, that you could not be disinterred and sent to wherever you were born, or your family wanted your remains to rest for at least a year. So Ada Young, Charles Young's wife, his very good friend and champion, W.E.B. Du Bois, who we'll come back to in a minute, they fought along with Black communities all over the United States, along with Colonel Charles Young's fraternity. He was made an honorary member of Omega Psi Phi. I was texting with about Jeremiah Wright, who is, of course, a faithful and stalwart member of Omega Psi Phi. And he was kidding. He said, yeah, when you were talking about Charles Young in office hours the other night, he said, I resisted the urge to remind you that he was a Q. No, yeah, him and Carr G. Woodson, no question. They weren't alphas, and that's okay. I love it. I just love the fact that the Omegas fought. Ada Young's like, we got to get my husband back over here. And they like, we got you. We got you. And Du Bois was hell on him, boy. But the Black community generally, I'm bringing all this up to say that in the wake of Charles Young's reinterment at Arlington, and then Ada fought for years to get a proper block of stone. And it's a beautiful block of stone with Young on one side. And on the other side, it's got Charles and Ada Young. The Omegas helped raise money. Du Bois helped raise money. When they finally had the funeral, June the 1st, 1923, they had it in that same amphitheater where the first two people to be funeralized, as Black people call it, at Arlington were Confederate soldiers, a show of national unity. Just these people's jollies, not our jollies. The third person to be funeralized remains on the steps outside the amphitheater under a big block of stone. That would be the person whose name is forever lost to history. He is narrated generally as the unknown soldier, the tomb of the unknown soldier. That was the third person. Confederate, unknown soldier, the fourth human being to be funeralized at Arlington, plantation, Mount Washington, now cemetery. The fourth person, Confederate, unknown soldier, Charles Young. Charles Young was funeralized on June the 1st, 1923. Charles Young's birthday, Black people for years marked his birthday as a ritual moment for us, movement in memory. It's not a ritual moment now because our memories are short as hell. We got President's Day. We hollering about Juneteenth. Now white folks on Juneteenth banners in South Carolina. We upset. I don't give a damn. You can put Charlie Brown on the damn Juneteenth banner. Y'all want to fight about that? Go ahead. And somebody should fight about it. That's your body part, not my body part. I'm in the head. You could be in the fist. But understand, the head reminds the fist what to hit, what not to hit. In 1925, County Cullen, another poet, wrote a poem for Charles Young. Let me read it. In memory of Colonel Charles Young. This is County Cullen, the great son of the Caribbean by way of African U.S., whose poem, If We Must Die, Let Us Nobly Die, written in the wake of the Red Summer, 1919. County Cullen says, along the shore, the tall, thin grass that fringes that dark river, while sinuously soft feet pass, begins to bleed and quiver. The great dark voice breaks with a sob across the womb of night. Above your grave, the tom-toms throb, and the hills are weird at night. And the hills are weird with light. The great dark heart is like a well drained bitter by the sky, and all the honeyed lies they tell come here to thirst and die. No lie is strong enough to kill the roots that work below. From your rich dust and slaughtered will, a tree with tongues will grow. As I stood there before the mortal remains of Charles and Ada Young, which is on a hill, by the way. Ain't no easy way to get to Section 3. Woo! And on the wrong shoes, Professor Hunter. Now I got I got my exercise. I had forgotten. See, I go to Arlington. I don't go to Arlington a lot, but I tell you, if you've never been to Arlington, you should go because your ancestors are there. There are 3,800 free Africans who lived during the period of the Civil War. Freedman's Village was on the grounds of Arlington. There are 3,800 of them buried. There are 1,500 U.S. colored troops. All this in Section 27, just in Section 27. Our ancestors are there. It ain't just the people we know over the last 100 years, 150 years. It's all those other people. And so, but to get to Charles Young, when you leave a visitor center, you got to walk a long way. And so when I got around there, I'm looking for Section 3. And the closer I got, the more I realized I'm going to the right place. So I passed these two brothers. They were outside the truck. Now, mind you, like I said, they got 250 landscapers alone. These cats are on the plumbing crew. So I'm sitting talking to these brothers. I said, I'm going up Section 3. And I started to talk about Charles Young. I said, I ain't no need to do all that because, let me just vibe with these brothers. Because as Ralph Ellison once wrote in a great one of my favorite essays by the great Ralph Ellison, son of Oklahoma, the little man at Chirac Station, which was the train station extension at Tuskegee. He said that his music teacher at Tuskegee, the sister said, when he went down and study music, he said, while you playing that trumpet, while you're practicing your musical instruments. By the way, Charles Young was a multi-instrument musician, piano, flute. He composed music. He composed music for his friend Paul Dunbar, who would come from Dayton, and they would sit there at Young's home, HOLM, Young's home, which was what Charles Young, A. Young named their house. And Charles Young would compose music for Paul Laurence Dunbar's poems. He wrote plays. He wrote a play on Toussaint Louverture. Had one in mind on John Brown. Oh man, Charles Young. We ain't gonna talk about Charles Young the way we could today. Just a little bit today. Just a little bit because what you think about this. But in any rate, I didn't want to get into all that but one of the things Ralph Ellison talked about in his essay, The Little Man at Chirac Station, was that, my teacher told me in Alabama at Tuskegee as I was practicing, always do your best. Always practice. And understand that you might think you're playing for me or for those master musicians or for your teachers. But that train station, that little train station where they come off the spur and comes out here? Yeah. There's a little man that sits in there. You probably don't pay attention to him. You might think he's, bum or just the guy that works there. Maybe he just sweeps the little corners of the room. Yeah. You got to play like that little man knows more about music than anybody. And then Ellison, in the rest of the essay, talks about the sites of expertise. And he gives the story of being, in the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and how, you have the great conductors and the great musicians and the music critics and the great singers and the great instrumentalists. And they play. He says, one day I'm in there between shows and I'm listening to this debate over who sings the greatest aria, who's the greatest tenor, who's the greatest mezzo soprano, and the attention to detail and the command of music and the ear for being able to distinguish is exquisite. And I said, which critics are these? Who are these? The writers from the New York Times? So he looks around and who is it? It's the brothers who move the sets. Who has heard this music more than anyone? The people who move the sets and the scenery. They've heard every show ever been produced at the Met. So whenever you go into space, always listen with I ain't saying necessarily talk all the time. Listen to the people who work there. And so I go to Arlington, I'll be chopping it up with the ground crew, with the people out there working in that hot heat. The brothers who were pulling off the they call it a vault. Making the vault for the graves. It's an active cemetery. And I saw the brothers. I said, man, y'all working like hell. Yeah, man, it's hot. See, y'all really, this is an active cemetery. He said, yeah, man, all the time, brother. And I'm watching them, grave diggers, Not digging the grave. Grave has been dug, but now they're preparing. I saw the tarp over the, grave. So I passed these two brothers coming up the hill. They outside the truck. And I said, where's section 3, brothers? I think I'm going the right way. And then one brother said, I'm not sure. And he said, hey, man, where the other? And so the guy said, well, you can put it up on the app. He said, you got the app? I said, no, I ain't got the app. Because you know me, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't like to have my whole mind attuned to the devices. But I've been walking for about 20 minutes. And I'm going the right way because you got to go up where the amphitheater is, Two Unknown Soldier, and then you go beyond and go over there. So I know where I'm going kind of. I just want to confirm. I said, that's what I told him. I said, I'm trying to confirm. He said, oh, so I said, so what do y'all do? He said, oh, no, we in the plumbing. He said, that's why I don't know. I usually don't come over here, work on this side. They only call us when something goes wrong. I said, like what? So now he's pointing at the drains. And I'm looking at these exquisitely crafted curbs and drains. And if you look like you see a sewer on the street, but these joints is so clean. And I'm looking at these cats with this kitted out truck with all this stuff on it. And I'm like, their job is to go in. And he said, but you could go down that way. Look, according to this, you go down that way. And he's pointing across the grass. Now, people are not walking on the grass. You can walk on the grass, of course. There are rituals on the grass, this kind of thing. So he says, you can go across there. And I said, yeah, but I think that I probably just need to go up this street. He said, no, I think they're saying here you need to go. And I'm thinking to myself, you wrong. But I'm going to listen to you because you work here and I don't. So I went across, cutting through, walking past the graves, got on the street, saw the signs, and came across, and like the top of a circle had to come all the way back. Now I'm looking down on the brothers, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting my exercise now. I told y'all I could have come up this street, but it's okay because it was more important to have that conversation. Anyway, I said, so when I got up to the top of the circle, I looked up and I seen this hill, with these graves going up the hill, and I said, oh yeah, this is where they're up there. And I thought to myself, now, see, if I start walking up that hill in these shoes and come tumbling down, I'm not in the. My daddy was a veteran of World War II. But they can't. They don't bury me in Arlington. And it's hot. So I kept walking, and I came across. Then I started hearing, and it started getting louder the closer I got on the other side as I'm coming up around to come up the ridge. And then what came into view? A work crew paving a stretch of the service road that was up there. They're working too on not just paving, but refurbishing the concrete on the sidewalk, not kind of sidewalk, almost like a gutter. I'm raising out to say that crew, I saw maybe 2 or 3 white people, one of them a white woman, but they were predominantly non-white, Latino. I stopped and chatted for a couple of seconds with a brother who was there. By accent, I think he's probably a son of the Caribbean or the continent, but I didn't ask him. And that's when I passed Walter Reed. When I saw Walter Reed, I said, I know it's coming close to Charles Young because I know Walter Reed. I said, now it was coming back to me. There's a tree. Just on the other side of that tree is the big block of stone with Charles and Ada Young. So they're behind a tree if you're coming in from the ridge. But if you look over beyond them, they're on the top of a hill looking down on all these people. And when County Cullen's poem talks about no lie is strong enough to kill the roots that work below, from your rich dust and slaughtered will, a tree with tongues will grow. It's like it's a perfect poem because there's a tree that no doubt has been fed by the mortal remains of Charles and Ada Young because they've been there. Charles has been there for a century. Ada Young made transition in the early 1950s. But I'm raising all that because we all gonna go that way. You understand? And by the way, the book I was reading from that includes this is a very good book called For Race and Country, The Life and Career of Colonel Charles Young by David Kilroy. It's one of the few books on Young. And everybody always writing these books, David Icke and them, new book on King, whatever. Every generation, they say, must tell its own story. I tend to trust in terms of the rhythm and feel of the times, the things that were written or spoken or come to us from the moment. And I understand people say, well, new archival documents, new things revealed. I understand. But here's the thing you have to understand. No archive can replicate the moment that it claims to document. It can help us gain a better understanding of the times. It can give us a better understanding of the thinking. But ultimately, each person who tells a story is narrating it with their assumptions. There is a brand new book, an excellent book by this brother. Chad Williams, called The Wounded World. W.E.B. Du Bois in the First World War. I'm going to talk to this brother. Me and this brother got to have a conversation. I like this book. He's at Brandeis University. This Chad Williams right here, Brother Chad Williams. I've seen a couple of talks he's given since the book came out. The whole book, the whole 500-page book is about W.E.B. Du Bois. And it uses as its point of entry the fact that Du Bois wrote over 1,000 pages on World War I. Du Bois wrote he and this other brother collaborated, and the book was never published. Many of Du Bois's books, many of Du Bois's manuscripts and writings are unpublished. A vast archive of unpublished stuff. This 1,000-page book is one of them, and the book is called, what's it called? The Black Man and the Wounded World. Du Bois calls World War I a failure. He said, World War I is when the United States basically announced itself as, hey, Spain and England and France. Hey, Ma, talking to England. We got next. So we're the bastard offspring, settler colonial offspring of y'all. And now we kind of got our sea legs under us. And now we're going to take the next reign of helping you perpetuate global white supremacy. By the way, shout out to the United States government. Finland just joined NATO. Zelensky is over there begging for Ukraine to join. The Secretary Blinken just gave a speech, hype man speech at the meeting they're having now. And he's in Finland. I'm like, look, man, y'all little alliances. In fact, it was so funny while you there doing that. This is the front page of Financial Times Weekend. CIA chief made secret visit to China. Anyway, y'all know what it is. We out here picking up sides in Europe versus the world. But my point is that the United States in World War I basically exploded out of its attempt to subdue the hemisphere, to jump the water and stick its nose more fully into the affairs of the world. Woodrow Wilson declaring war on Germany and this kind of thing. I'm bringing all it up to say that what Chad Williams does is talk about how Du Bois narrated this. Because if you remember, in 1915, he wrote a very important essay in Atlantic magazine called The African Roots of War, where he talks about global imperialism and white supremacy and how Africa and the fight over African resources, the first fight over African resources in the contemporary world being the fight to bring us into this world, something he would write about later in Black Reconstruction in America in 1935. But imagine Du Bois's global history read through how African people have been sucked into this criminal enterprise, and how those of us in the United States, while fighting for some form of autonomy, freedom as we might call it, as in camp freedom, for some ability to self-determine from 1914 to 1918, a year before the Red Summer 1919, and then 2 years later, the massacres at Tulsa. Du Bois says, but what the United States was doing, what this social structure was doing, was trying to expand, perfect, extend its dominance as a country, as a reification of white supremacy, all this stuff. And what Chad Williams does is do a brilliant job in picking as much as he can Du Bois's archives clean. There is a substantial amount of this book that is dedicated to the life of Charles Young. And we're going to talk again. I'm coming to Charles Young in a second. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it today, but I really want to do that because those of you who are not in narrative and not in Nubia, we spent Monday night talking about Charles Young a little bit because one of the books I brought back from Wilberforce last week was a book that, I don't see this book easily gotten, but you can get it if you go to the website for the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center in Wilberforce. So Sister Carolyn and all them, and some of the people that you all met when I tried to introduce you to them on Saturday when out there with Baba Larry Crow and Mama LaBC, when we had the Martin Delaney ritual. This is the book we talked about Monday night in Nubia, Yours for Race and Country, Reflections on the Life of Colonel Charles Young. Dr. Carolyn Mazlumi is a national treasure. I mean, a Black national treasure. I mean, you people talk about America, but I'm not in the charitable mood toward the United States of America today, and I really don't care. That's not true. I always care what our people think. But for those who would say, you're America, I'm like, yeah. Okay. But at any rate, it's a book of quilts. They made a call. Alicia Brown, Carolyn Mazlumi, Brian Shellum, and Floyd Thomas, who was curator for many years at the National Museum in Wilberforce. They made a call for sisters, non-white women, to create, these are black women mostly, quilts about Charles Young. And they create these quilts. This is Viola Burley Leak from Washington, D.C. We talked a lot, and I won't reiterate this. If you're in Nubia, you can always go into the archive and see our conversation. This is Sandra Scott, sister from Cambridge, UK, did a whole one on the death of Charles Young. And you see there, very interesting how she narrated. Actually, this is the salute that they gave, the Nigerian soldiers gave when they buried him in Nigeria. You see them giving that 21 gun salute in front of a quilted piece representing the continent of Africa. And of course, those same soldiers then exhume him, send him. He comes into the harbor of Brooklyn, and then the brothers take him. By then, there are Charles Young posts. The American Legion at one time, I think John F. Kennedy had like 15 American Legion posts named for him. Charles Young had 16. It's amazing how someone like Charles Young could fall out of the movement and memory of African people in this country. And Chad Williams writes exquisitely about Du Bois's famous closed ranks editorial in the Crisis magazine, where he says, well, let's go off and fight this war, and then we'll settle what we need to do because we're fighting fascism. And Du Bois says, I regretted that for the rest of my life. He spends the rest of his life in regret for that, because of course, after the war, he writes the famous editorial, We Return Fighting, because the Red Summer is right there. His friend James Weldon Johnson naming it that, because what you doing that uniform, boy? Lynchings and race wars, Chicago and all this kind of 1919. The thing that drove is Josephine Baker's birthday coming? The thing that drove Josephine Baker into had to leave East St. Louis, the pogroms down there that they did, these white riots. Sandy Darity was at UMass, and this white man asked him a couple of days ago, it's kind of gone viral on social media, about black on black crime. And then Sandy, took him out, talking about the 100 or more race pogroms. And I'm like, that's good. But people are like, yeah, see, that's how you handle it. No, that's not how you handle it. I mean, that is one way to handle it. Absolutely. But really the way to handle it, I would handle it, be like, yeah, okay. White on white crime is why we're having this conversation in English. Why you're asking me the question in English, and why I'm understanding it in English. Let's talk about violence, sir. No, come here. No, get your ass with him. Come, I don't. You done touched the tar, baby. Now let's dance. Let's talk about violence. Let's talk about violence. I don't want to talk about Tulsa. I don't want to talk about Chicago. I don't want to talk about all. No, I want to talk about the violence that has me speaking English. Do you really want to have this? I want to have the conversation that says, when you talk about black on black violence, I want to have a conversation where you calling me black and I'm calling you white. You know where that came from? That came from some ancestors of who we call white people. I'm not even gonna put it on you, man, because where you from, man? Where your people from? Yeah, I know, Massachusetts. I mean, before that, Ireland. Yeah, did you know the Irish were considered the N-words of the English? Yeah. Yeah. Do you speak Irish? Aaron or whatever? You don't know what I'm talking about, do you? Let's talk about violence. And so I'm going to drug him for filth. See, the problem we have is we start our memory with yesterday and think we done check somebody by reinforcing the social structure framework as our defense. That's why the concept of reparations gets blown out of the way wrongly, because we start the wrong place. But that's a story for another day. What Chad Williams does in talking about how Du Bois regrets this is map how Du Bois's theory is really about blackness and global white supremacy. Hence the title of his draft manuscript, The Black Man and the Wounded World. The failure of World War I to address the fundamental issues of human beingness in the world, and what it succeeded at is ensconcing, reinforcing, hence World War II, and then the Korean War, Vietnam, and all the Desert Storm, and all these global wars, reinforcing this violent global white supremacist network, with the United States now taking its turn in the seat of power. And what Chad Williams does after almost 500, well, no, not including notes, after almost 400 pages in the final chapter, he says, the Black Man in the Wounded World speaks to the, talking about Du Bois's manuscript, speaks to the enduring tension of being Black and being American. The quest to relieve the pain of this tension has defined much of the Black experience in American history. I would make the argument in some ways being American means being Black, but not in the way people make it as a triumphant. I'm saying that Blackness is the thing that we weren't before we left Africa, and it's used as an engine to propel Americanness, or to expand it globally. What Howard French would say, born in Blackness, it would expand into the notion of whiteness in the modern world. Chad Williams goes on and says, Du Bois believed that the double consciousness he prophetically articulated in the souls of black folk and elsewhere could be reconciled in the crucible of war and patriotism. Unfortunately, he was wrong. And as the years passed, he recognized his error. Okay. Yeah, because he left. And Chad Williams writes about that near the end. He goes to Ghana. He's there now. He's working on Encyclopedia Africana with Nkrumah there. He's buried there. Okay. Next line belongs to Chad Williams. Again, fact? Okay, that's fact. He left and said, chin up and fight on, but recognize American Negroes can't win. Okay. He born in 1868 during Reconstruction, lived through that period almost a century. So he saw that stuff, was participated in a lot of those fights. You can debate him, you can agree, you can disagree, but one thing you can't displace is he lived it and he narrated it his whole life. So I'm gonna trust him on this a little bit more than anybody who's now saying we found 3 more documents and this is what he meant. Nah, I can read what he said. The next line is Professor Williams's. But we should not see him as selfishly naive in believing that he and all black people could be full Americans. Up to his final years, even while facing persecution by the government and branded as an un-American, he refused to completely abandon his country. Wait a minute, damn, I dropped my glasses. Okay, you give it your passport, you move to Ghana, but you refuse to, okay. He wrote in his autobiography, this is the one that was published posthumously, I know the United States, this is Du Bois now, it is my country and the land of my fathers. It is still a land of magnificent possibilities. It is still the home of noble souls and generous people, but it is selling its birthright. It is betraying its mighty destiny. I was born on its soil and educated in its schools. I have served my country to the best of my ability. I have never knowingly broken its laws or unjustly attacked its reputation. At the same time, I have pointed out its injustices and crimes and blamed it, rightly as I believe, for its mistakes. It has given me education and some of its honors for which I am thankful. That's what Du Bois writes near the end of his life, at the end of his, drafted at near the end of his life, published after he passed. Chad Williams writes, he, Du Bois, viewed his unflinching criticism of America as the highest form of duty, citizenship, and patriotic sacrifice. Yeah, I'm going to go back and read Du Bois. Hey, what you doing, man? The struggle of African Americans to hold the nation accountable for its sins while also fighting for its potential endures to this day. And here's where I would say you drove this magnificent car into the ditch. Is that what we fighting for? The potential? Let's say that that's true. Let's embrace that. In fact, listen, no, come here. Let's embrace it. What that potential look like, bro? What does that potential look like? First of all, I'm not saying it's Pledge of Allegiance. That's my right? It's the First Amendment. That's the potential, right? Add the potential, say, I'm not never singing that and ain't standing up for that flag. That flag is a murderous rag. Every star on it got blood in it. That's my right? That what it mean to be an American, right? No, say it with your chest. Because if you don't, I know that you're scared. You ain't got to be scared. It's more of us than them. We're the global majority. Oh, wait, we ain't thinking global. You trying to confine this to the 4 corners of this settler state. Is that what you're doing? You better look around. Why? Because this birth rate going like this, and then the other birth rate's going up, and you just keep turning in to make an argument with these 5 people who soon to be 4, who soon to be 3, who soon to be 2. Oh, they got their finger on the trigger. What the hell's going on? Why are you arguing with you? You got to expand your... That's what Du Bois was doing. He didn't say the wounded United States. Come on, bro. I'm not mad at you because I understand it. There are matters of tenure and promotion. There are matters of jobs. There are matters of awards from your master. I mean, there are all these kind of things. But when you are a free African, you have a different person. When you're a free human being, you understand those artificial lines are artificials. Human beings drove that. And if you want to prosper in this place that you're in, you have to connect with the people who are all over the world. And you start locally, but you're always thinking expansively. You keep trying to wrap yourself in that little piece of flag. And as I'm walking through this former plantation, I'm thinking to myself, this fragile lie is kept up by the jollies of America. I am not a jolly of America. I'm a jolly of African people in our common humanity. So we're going to tell it. So Du Bois, writing about his friend Charles Young, and this is in a number of places. It's in the Crisis magazine. He wrote this just after Charles Young made transition. And if you want to read it, you can pull it up a lot of different places. I just pulled one of the many volumes it's in. This is the volumes that was edited by Nathan Huggins, The Selected Works of W.B. Du Bois. You can probably get this paperback very cheap. February 1922, Charles Young had made transition in Nigeria. By the way, he was there. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to read what Du Bois said about his friend. The life of Charles Young was a triumph of tragedy. No one ever knew the truth about the hell he went through at West Point. Prop, you say that Bragg went to West Point, so did Charles Young. Charles Young was the third person of African descent to be graduated from West Point. The fourth person of African descent was Benjamin O. Davis Jr., almost 50 years later, I think 47 years later. Benjamin O. Davis Jr., the son of Benjamin O. Davis Sr. Davis buried at Arlington, past his grave. Benjamin Davis' daddy was a master sergeant in the Buffalo Soldiers under the command of Charles Young, who raised Benjamin Davis Sr., whose son, Benjamin Davis Jr., became the fourth person to be graduated from West Point of African descent. Charles Young went to West Point because his daddy, Gabriel, this Negro was enslaved in Kentucky. Gabriel Young and his wife, Arminta Young, enslaved in Kentucky. Charles born in 1864, only son. Charles Young was born in 1864, and pops and moms was like, we ain't going through slavery no, because remember, Kentucky was loyal to the Union. See, this is the mistake people make about Abe Lincoln. Right? Abe Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, 1863 said, look, January 1st, 1862, January 1st, 1863, any state that is in rebellion to the United States, all Africans are thenceforth and forever free. That's beautiful. But guess what? What about Kentucky? What about Delaware? What about Maryland? Jersey, slave states. Oh, no, y'all can keep them Negroes. But what? But you could have freed the Africans in the states. No, I ain't trying. Look, if freeing them's going to keep the Union, fine. If freeing some of them and enslaving the rest of them, fine. If enslaving all of them, fine. I'm trying to preserve the Union. Charles Young's parents, Gabriel and Araminta, were in Kentucky. And as Abe Lincoln famously said in the early days of the war, in this war, I want God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. Young Dan Cameron, the defender of the killers of Breonna Taylor, is running for governor of Kentucky, a black man, married to white supremacy in the form of his mentor, Mitch McConnell. Hey, I thought y'all knew where I was going with that, didn't you? No. Love is love. Let's not get into that. But I can tell you what I am going with that when it comes to black women. You didn't defend Breonna Taylor. You defended her killers, Young Dan. Young Dan. Yeah, Young Dan. You want to be governor of Kentucky. Momentum of memory. You want to be governor of the state that Charles Young's parents escaped from to get to Ripley, Ohio. And they're buried in the shadow of Ripley, Ohio. Gabriel Young, who after he escaped, spent that last year of the Civil War in the United States colored troops, serving with distinction, who told his son, his only son, him and his wife's only son, who grew up in the segregated schools there. And then when he got to high school, the black high school, his classes weren't hard enough. So they finally let Charles Young go to the white school. Charles Young busted out the white school. And then his daddy was like, son, take that test for West Point. What the hell? Young scored like second highest or third highest in the state, which meant he qualified. And when he got to West Point, they hazed the out of him. The first year, the so-called plebe year, there's hazing, and then there's what they did to Charles Young. Du Bois became his friend when they were on faculty at Wilberforce because Charles Young finished at West Point. And what did they do with Negroes in the segregated army? Did y'all know that Arlington National Cemetery was segregated by race until Harry Truman desegregated the military in 1948? Oh, there's a story out there in that yard called Arlington, Mount Washington. Some of these things can't be reconciled because some of these bodies ain't the same. Social structure, who we to other people, governance, who are we to each other? Now, if you're going to build an America that's different than the one we've lived in, it's going to be in America different than the one we've lived in. If Chad Williams thinks that's what Du Bois was after, then I would encourage him to say, brother, go back and read your own book. Du Bois in Ghana. Chin up and fight on. Now, his concepts are complex. But Charles Young, who was the only one of the two of the first three who stayed in the military for his whole life, Charles Young ended up being a professor of military science at Wilberforce from like 1894 to 1898. That's when he met and befriended W.E.B. Nana Du Bois. Because Du Bois, of course, went to Philadelphia, 1899, the Philadelphia Negro. He and Nana and their son Burgard, they in Philly. But they overlapped and they became very good friends. Because Charles Young, man, this guy, my goodness, Young was a linguist. He was a professor of military science at Wilberforce. He was also a professor of French and mathematics. He knew Latin, and he was an active duty military. So they sent him. He fights in Mexico. They sent him to chase Pancho Villa or whatever. Black Jack Pershing, General Pershing. Pershing nominates Young to be a general back then. Now, this is where it gets hazy, right? Because he's a military man, which means you are the sword of the country. They just passed the damn budget, or kicked it down the road to January 2025 because it's all a political document, right? And one thing they didn't cut was the military spending. Why? Because you done tried to beat up the whole world and now you're scared. So you got to keep pouring trillions of dollars into this military budget while people don't have nothing to eat. And you claim that you want to balance the budget. You ain't trying to balance the damn budget. But the military is the thing that they use to invade everybody. And Charles Young was a military man. His father fought for his freedom. And in that hazy moment of Reconstruction tells the son, you know what? Why don't follow my footsteps. Keep going. Keep going. Because it's one thing to be in the damn military in the United States Colored Troops. We had a Major Delaney, Martin Delaney, who we talked about last week. But you know what? You could be, man. What you think, Araminta? His mama, like, I think about my baby. He's the smartest human being on the planet. Everything he studies, he masters. So he went to West Point, survived that, graduated, comes to Wilberforce. He's teaching math. He's teaching French. He studies Latin. They sent him out to Pancho Villa. He studies and learns Spanish. He knew Spanish before he went there. Then they sent him to Haiti. He's the first diplomat, really, of African descent with a military background. You could argue Fred Douglass and that kind of thing, but Charles Young shows up in Haiti. They got him in Haiti. Why? Because the United States is going to invade Haiti. They invaded Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He speaks Spanish. Then he learns Creole because he speaks French. He learns Creole, Haitian Creole. In fact, he writes a damn dictionary of Haitian Creole. The whole time he's reading books. He's always reading and writing. Some of his papers are at the National Museum of Afro-American History and Culture, National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center in Wilberforce. By the way, I didn't mention it while I was there, but I should mention it here since we talked about her early on. Anna Arnold Hedgeman's papers are at where we were last week. They're there at Wilberforce in that building. But anyway, story for another day. Charles Young stuff, but Charles Young stuff is a lot of other places too. He's got all these letters and all these manuscripts, all these music scores. He would write music in between things he was doing where he was stationed. He ends up in the Philippines. Remember we talked about Carter G. Woodson being in the Philippines, his frat brother, another Q, right? Woodson was in the Philippines. Young was in the Philippines because America's building its empire of color. Then they sent him to Nigeria. Then they sent him to Liberia. This is where the thing gets fascinating for me. Because when you understand why he was in Liberia, there's a dissertation that a cat named Tim Rainey wrote. I want to say I know this brother. That's what I was telling you, probably. Oh, if y'all know Timothy Rainey, please, connect him because I'd love for him to come in and talk to us about this. He wrote a dissertation 20 years ago, 2001, at Johns Hopkins. He went to his undergrad, though, at Morgan State, called Buffalo Soldiers in Africa. Buffalo Soldiers in Africa, the Liberia Frontier Force and the United States Army, 1912 to 1927. Why are Black soldiers in Africa? Because the United States colony in Africa, known as Liberia, we're in the United States and have no colonies in Africa. That's a lie. Liberia is one. Y'all sent formerly enslaved Africans and so-called free Africans over to Liberia, not to return to Africa, but to basically have a toenail over there. And you created a militia that fought against the Africans who were there. Still to this day, how in a country that you made up and piped Africans who were formerly enslaved in the early to mid 19th century, how in 2022 people still tell the difference between an American Liberian and Liberians who are there? Why? Because you set up that conflict. This is what y'all do. The violences. Sandy, I understand what you was doing, brother, about the pogroms and stuff, but you got to put this in the larger context of a field of violence. That's how you check it. And anybody saying, look what he did, that tells me you can't be a jolly yet. Maybe you're not trying to be a jolly. You just like to see people fighting with white people. I understand the visceral thrill, but at some point we got to get better. As John Carr said, don't get mad, get smart. So what Tim Rainey does, who's active duty military, I mean, the dissertation is brilliant. What he writes about is how these brothers of African descent interacted, these military men, these Buffalo soldiers, 9th, 10th Cavalry, this kind of thing, interacted in Liberia with indigenous Liberians because their jobs go up there and help the Liberians create a military, but their interaction with them, Tim Rainey writes, is similar to the white army people who invade. Charles Young is on the horns of the dilemma, though, because Charles Young is a race man. He's very interested in African history. He's very interested in African people. He's very interested in the possibilities of global Africana. He wouldn't have called it any of that, but what he did say was, while he was over there, I saw this Marcus Garvey movement. This is the second time he went. We'll get to the second time in a minute. He says, I see the possibilities of this Garvey movement. And I think it could be really something. Because remember, Garvey and them was like, we're going to come to Liberia. We're going to get in millions of dollars. We're going to build and establish here. Yeah, I know y'all looking at me crazy because I'm talking about I'm the president of Africa. And that's it. But we're going to, and Charles Young is like, this could work. He says, but then I saw that they didn't have the money. And what Charles Young writes is, you need the money to fight these white boys because they got the money. And I don't see how you're going to be able to pull this off without the resources. I thought y'all may have had the resources. He's writing Du Bois about this. Of course, Du Bois ends up on the wrong side of the Garvey movement on that too. But Charles Young is different. Remember, this is a guy trained as a killer who killed for a living. This is a man who the military would narrate as a great American hero who happens to be black. First black superintendent of the National Park Service. That's true because they sent the 9th and 10th Cavalry out to carve out pathways and manage what becomes Sequoia National Park. So Charles Young goes out there and does that. Charles Young, I mean, but that's Charles Young. That's how Charles Young shows up in the social structure. In the governance formation, Charles Young is looking very different. Yes, he was an army man, but he was also a race man, which keeps raising his questions. I'm walking through Arlington on Thursday, and I'm looking at the grave of Joe Louis with maybe 40 white kids and a couple of little spots of black kids. One of whom saw my shirt and said, I like your shirt. And I was like, yeah, I see you, governance, in this sea. Y'all on y'all class trip. I didn't even ask her where she was from. 3 or 4 black kids. I'm coming through the screening. I'm sitting there, getting my thoughts together, reflecting on where I am. I'm in the bookstore. I'm looking for Charles Young book. It's not in there. I'm looking for the book on section 27 of Arlington National Cemetery. It's not in there. I'm looking for the book on the Freedman Cemetery that is in Alexandria, where the United States colored troops were once buried, and then they dug them up and put them in the military cemetery in Arlington. It's not in there. And so I asked the brother, wait, we have them from time to time. Yeah, but I see all these damn books about John F. Kennedy, and then I see Thurgood Marshall. Oh, that's great, Colin Powell. Where the Charles Young book? I've seen the Charles Young book in here. Y'all should have that in constant rotation. And there's a whole section in this cemetery. You know, it used to be a plantation. What the book on that? I ain't mad at y'all though, because I know y'all didn't pick the stock. As I'm coming out, I sit on one of the little benches and I'm watching people. This flood of children. It's beautiful to see these children from all over the country because they come into the National Shrine. Again, a jolly, you're making the memory of this country. This is the blood of the country. This is a ritual place, right? But as I'm watching it, I'm seeing these black kids sprinkled out, not a whole lot of them. And 4 or 5 of those children, as I'm sitting there, I like your shirt. Thank you. I give them a little fist. The Black Power fist. Why? Because I don't even know why you said that, but I know what I would like to think about why you said that. Because it's a governance thing. I know these are your friends, they're very great, but you said that because you also exist in the governance formation. I understand. I'm glad I wore that shirt today, so thanks. Thanks, Dunbar. So let me finish reading what Du Bois wrote about his friend, and then we'll wind up. The Life of Charles Young. Let me see what time it is here because I don't want. Okay, good. The life of Charles Young was a triumph of tragedy. No one ever knew the truth about the hell he went through at West Point. He seldom even mentioned it. The pain was too great. Few knew what faced him always in his Army life. It was not enough for him to do well. He must always do better. And so much and so conspicuously better as to disarm the scoundrels that ever trailed him. He lived in the Army surrounded by insult and intrigue, and yet he set his teeth and kept his soul serene and triumphed. One more editorial. As we talked about when we read Souls of Black Folk, every generation defines literacy according to the shape and context of the social structure it lives in. But I promise you, there is something to be gained from reading writing like this. Sitting outside the hotel in Dayton Sunday morning, and I heard a young brother who was the valet, in between getting people's cars and working, hard working brother. I heard him tell an elder sister, he's from South Carolina. But in between, he was recording, I guess, a hip hop song he was creating in his into his phone. And all I heard was, when I read like this, I say, I would love to sit side by side with this brother and say, read this paragraph. Let's chew through this language. I suspect it would have something, an impact on the, because that's baby talk. I'm much more worried about the shadow ban on books. You banning books, but what about them ones that's still up there? You didn't read them. That's the shadow ban. Let's continue. Du Bois writes, he was one of the few men I know who literally turned the other cheek with Jesus Christ. He was laughed at for it, and his own people chided him bitterly, yet he persisted. When a white Southern pygmy at West Point protested at taking food from a dish passed first to Young, Young passed it to him first, and afterward to himself. When officers of inferior rank refused to salute a, quote, N-word, he saluted them. Seldom did he lose his temper, seldom complain. With his own people, he was always the genial, hearty, half-boyish friend. He kissed the girls, he slapped the boys on the back, threw his arms about his friends, scattered his money in charity. Only now and then, behind the veil, did his nearest comrades see the hurt and pain graven on his heart. And when it appeared, he promptly drowned it in his music, his beloved music, which always poured from his quick, nervous fingers to caress and bathe his soul. Steadily, unswervingly, he did his duty, and duty to him, as to few modern men, was spelled in capitals. It was his lodestar, his soul, and neither force nor reason swerved him from it. His second going to Africa, after a terrible attack of blackwater fever, was suicide. He knew it. His wife knew it. His friends knew it. He had been sent to Africa because the army considered his blood pressure too high to let him go to Europe. They sent him there to die. They sent him there because he was one of the very best officers in the service, and if he had gone to Europe, he could not have been denied the stars of a general. They could not stand a black American general. Therefore, they sent him to the fever coast of Africa. They ordered him to make roads back in the haunted jungle. He knew what they wanted and intended. He could have escaped it by accepting his retirement from active service, refusing his call to active duty, and then he could have lounged and lived at leisure on his retirement pay. But Africa needed him. He did not yell and collect money and advertise great schemes and parade in crimson. He just went quietly, ignoring appeal and protest. Finally, Du Bois writes, he is dead. But the heart of a great black race, the ancient of days, the undying and eternal, rises and salutes his shining memory. Well done, Charles Young, soldier and man, an unswerving friend. Charles Young, on the eve of World War I, looked forward to the war, the Great War for Democracy, which Du Bois realized at the end was a failure for Black people and a victory for white supremacy. Hence the manuscript, The Black Man in the Wounded World. Charles Young was retired by the United States government, United States Army, United States military, under the auspices of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, Woodrow Racist Wilson. As Chad Williams brilliantly documents, the latest in a line of many to document, beginning with Du Bois and others. Charles Young, by the way, wrote books. He wrote a whole book on the morals and values of the armies of nations. I got a photocopy of it right here. So that's in storage, I'm sure, because I couldn't find my Charles Young, that book. But at any rate, y'all can look it up. Somebody put it in chat in a minute. I'm about to wind this up in a couple of minutes anyway. They retired him because, as Chad Williams, Professor Williams documents, United States senators, Louisiana, they went to Wilson like, we ain't taking orders. I don't want my boys taking orders from Black men. You got to retire this boy. Because if this boy going to World War II on active duty, he's going to be a general. Do you understand? Battlefield promotions. Charles Young about to be a general, y'all. We got to stop that. So Woodrow Wilson being the he is. That was a simulation of a crack. I'm trying to be mindful. They retire him. And as I talked about last week, and Chad Williams writes about this, and in fact, where's the Gabriel Young's book? David Kilroy's book. David Kilroy writes about this. It's very interesting. Let me see if I can find it quickly, because I like being able to quote these kind of things. And we're going to do a whole lot more of this because I won't be able to find it quickly because I don't mark in these books. So here we go. The glass ceiling. It's in the chapter on the glass ceiling, if I can find it quickly. Because Young keeps writing. They give him a physical and they give him an exam to promote him to colonel in May 1917. And they promote him to colonel, but then they retire him before the end of the war because they don't want him to be promoted to general in the war. So let me see here. Columbus. He's lobbying the whole time. Everybody's writing. Du Bois is writing. Oswald Garrison Villard, Spingarn, and them. Everybody is trying to get the NAACP. And he rides his horse. Here we go. In June 1918, war's almost over. With his appeals exhausted and the walls closing in around him, Young decided on one last desperate effort to return to service, secure a return to service. As soon as the school year was over, the 54-year-old retired colonel prepared to undertake a grueling 497-mile horseback ride to Washington, D.C. to rid myself of this case and to show the Secretary of War that I am physically fit. He's a professor at Wilberforce. They done told him your blood pressure's messed up. Now you fit as hell, so we're going to let you be a colonel. Wait a minute, hold on. These white boys say you got to be retired. You retired, man. We can't send you nowhere. You can't send you to Europe. Remember Du Bois said, you can't go to Europe and fight, man. But they send him to Africa later. Watch this. He says, sending one of his favorite horses, Dolly, ahead on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, Young saddled his huge black Kentucky-bred mare, Blacksmith. See, here's the problem. Somebody gonna make a Charles Young movie and mess it up. It's gonna be some white bureaucrat in Washington who wanted to reinstate him, who's gonna have a tear rolling down his cheek as he writes denied. It's gonna be the white point of entry. But don't mess up Charles. In fact, don't even make no movie. See, here's the problem. Don't make no movie about Charles Young. Y'all be done messed it up. We gonna make a movie about Charles Young, okay? Young saddled his huge black Kentucky-bred mare, Blacksmith. You can't make this up. And set off for the nation's capital from his home in Wilberforce. His non-stop, unassisted ride. I know what y'all was thinking. He stopped at the Motel 6 every 3 miles, right? His non-stop, unassisted ride. I'm worried about going up the hill to see him, and I'm 58 years old. He's 54 years old, man, got on a black horse named Blacksmith and rode it. He says his non-stop unassisted ride took him through town and hamlet, by stream and river, over the Appalachians, through Athens, Parkersburg, Clarksburg, Winchester, and on to Washington, walking on foot 15 minutes in each hour to rest his horse. Professor Hunter, you can't do nothing but laugh, can you? This is not a comic book. This ain't Into the Spider-Verse. Young crossed the M Street Bridge into Georgetown 16 days from leaving his house. This man fasted in a damn Greyhound bus. He had averaged 31 miles per day with only one rest day during the whole ride. Watch this. Finally, an agreeably surprised black public greeted his arrival in Washington June 22 with enthusiasm, and the black press reported that after days in the saddle, the colonel looks fit for service at the front. Tell you about Charles Young. After the war, they still didn't unretire him, but guess what? War's over. Now they unretire him and send him to Liberia. The boys said they sent him to die. Charles Young went to Liberia. Again, Tim Rainey's dissertation, which focuses on Charles Young and Ben Davis. Because remember, Ben Davis was Master Sergeant under Charles Young. Ben Davis' son ends up being the next guy to graduate from West Point. There ain't none of this hype in the military. I could give a damn about the military. My daddy was a veteran. Those little white tombstones, like the one Medgar Evers buried in, my daddy got one just like it. My mother and father rest under one of them tombstones. And we was fighting with the man right up until, so when you want to cross on the tombstone, I'm saying I really want to arc on the tombstone. Well, that ain't what my dad was, not my daddy's life. So put that cross on there. My daddy was a deacon in the Baptist church. I'm well aware of ways of knowing are different. You understand? But you need to understand that I know this is a military cemetery. I've been in many military cemeteries. I've probably been in more than you have, sir. But I know under them little white pill boxes, there's a lot of us under them. And so Rainey writes about the fact that you sent these guys over here to expand your foreign policy. That's why they called Charles Young a young early diplomat. But Charles Young is there representing the U.S. Army, but he's also representing himself. So when they sent him over there, he got sick and made transition in 1922 because he is sent to Lagos. He's sent to Nigeria, to the British Protectorate on U.S. business. But he writes back to Du Bois. He had about 300 books he had shipped to Africa. He lost 200 of them. He mad about that. He writing back to Ada like, where my shit at? Ada, by the way, his wife, she from the West Coast, from the Oakland Bay Area, also very deeply involved with languages, music. They shared a great love for literature. Just an incredible couple. Lived the rest of her life in Wilberforce. Took care of her mother-in-law, Arminta, till she made transition. Arminta, by the way, remarried after her husband, Charles Young's father, made transition. She is buried near where Charles Young and Ada Young's children are buried. She's in Ohio as well. She chose to be buried with her first husband, Gabriel. So they're buried under this huge white marker with Gabriel Young and with Arminta Young. And between them, you got all Gabriel Young's military exploits, United States colored troops. I mean, my goodness, these are Africans. You see, they were loyal Americans. Y'all stop reading that bullshit back into history. These are Africans who fought their way out of enslavement. Give me a gun and I don't give a damn. You're an American. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I'm getting ready to kill these crackers. Why? Because remember Fort Pillow? Remember Fort Wagner? And Young writes about that. Charles Young did not write a play on George Washington. Charles Brown, yes, I'm going to write a play about John Brown because I finished this one on Toussaint Louverture. Y'all better look at Charles Young. Well, y'all acting like American hero. Don't do that, man. Or do it. That's fine. But don't claim to be a jolly. Even a griot. You need to be something else. So when they sent Charles Young, he said, well, I go to Nigeria. Why? Because I'm trying to get to Kano. Kano, the ancient walled city of Kano, about 500-mile road trip from Lagos. All Nigerians, y'all know where that is. Northern Nigeria. Why does Charles Young want to go to Kano? He been telling Du Bois, I want to write a history of African civilizations. Huh? But you're an American Army man. No, I am a race man. In fact, Du Bois knew Charles Young. That's why he was so tore up about what happened to Charles Young. Du Bois is like, no, this man saw the black world as connected. And he lived his life that way. Anywhere he went around black people, he immersed with black. Y'all send me to Haiti because y'all want to invade Haiti in 1915. Y'all was there from 15 to 41. I'll go down there, but I'm going to learn Creole. Governance. Who are we to each other? Ways of knowing. You think Charles Young wasn't learning about Vodun too on the side? Y'all better pay attention. This brother was brilliant. The white boys are like, he's a good soldier, but yeah. Which one of you white boys, in terms of mediocrity, Prof, as you mentioned, which one of you white boys got a half dozen languages in command, can go teach all of them at the black school, because you only want the brothers to teach at the white. You got 3 dudes came out of Morehouse, so you want them to teach at Wilberforce and then go off to active duty. When they set up the camp, because they said you should have black officers in World War I, 1917, Newton Baker, Secretary of War, Emmett Scott, who wrote a history of the war, he's at Howard after after Booker T. Washington dies in 1915. They're there. They set up a camp. 2 of the founders of Omega Psi Phi were in the United States Army. One of the reasons they invite Charles Young to become an honorary member of Omega Psi Phi is because you had men who were technically lower ranking than Colonel Charles Young who were in the military. Charles Young was a hero to these young cats. And they put their whole lives on the line. Then they come back to the United States, and these hillbillies, the grandparents of the Make America Great crowd, trying to lynch them in their uniforms because they got on America. You can have this damn American flag, and you can get this gun too, baby. Come get it. In other words, the Red Summer was not just black people getting killed. Cop narrate, stop. In fact, oh man, this black woman wrote to the crisis after Du Bois is in there talking about the Red Summer, how they came for black people in Washington, D.C., and black people gave it back to them. In fact, my man, I was looking around for Gerald's new book. Gerald Horn just published a new book called Revolting Capital, The History of Race in Washington, D.C. Brilliant book. And when they are fighting in Washington, D.C., when these white boys want to kill somebody, he said, come on, let's dance. What you going to do? A black woman writes the... Wait a minute. Hold on. I might be able to find it if I got about 15 seconds. I think I don't know. If I can't, I'm going to be kind of, let me see, Crisis Magazine, 110, 113, because I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want y'all to think. The First World War, here we go. More than a million, Woodrow Wilson, white boy. Expand, Black Americans, Booker T. Washington, the Klan, Black militancy, the Klan marched in Washington, D.C., Black self-determination. Here we go. UNIA, African Blood Brotherhood. Oh, man, I'm not going to be able to find it. That's too bad. There was a black woman who wrote a letter to the crisis. Let me see if I can see it under Red Summer. See, I don't like to write in my books. Booker T. Washington died in 19. Give me a second here. I'm looking in Black Movements in America, Cedric Robinson's book, where Du Bois is writing about how they fought back. Let me see the Klan movement. Give me a second here. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Then, of course, came the Red Summer, the white racist pogroms that hit Chicago, Washington, D.C., and 23 other American cities. The violence was disturbing, but now the anxiety was not confined to the black victims. Blacks had fought back. One Southern colored woman, quote unquote, wrote The Crisis in November 1915. This is what the sister writes. Science and technology, newspapers. That's science and technology. Ways of knowing. What ways of understanding and interpreting the world have we created? Governance. Who are we to each other? These are all in play. This is what the sister writes. The Washington riot gave me the thrill that comes once in a lifetime. I read between the lines of our morning paper that at least our men had stood like men, struck back. We're no longer dumb, driven cattle. County Cullen, who wrote that poem for Charles Young, also wrote, if we must die, let us nobly die. The sister finally writes, when I could no longer read for my streaming tears, I stood up alone in my room, held both hands high over my head. Y'all know black women my mama used to do this when she started getting happy. I stood up alone in my room, held both hands high over my head and exclaimed aloud, oh, I thank God. Thank God. Let's lynch this nigga. Let's dance. Oh, I thank God. Thank God. You see this boy that got killed this week? The shop owner decided, oh, what you doing? Get out here, and shot him. Brought up memories of Latasha Harlins out there in the West Coast. They convicted that Korean lady they killed her, shot in the back of the head, and the white woman judge was like, I gave you community service and probation. Yeah, we kick in the door waving 4-4. The black lady is like, oh, I thank God. Finally, what the hell? Is this just a history of ass whoopings? The Red Summer, they killed our... No, we fought back. Y'all stop listening to these people who are not narrating our memory. We don't get the movement of our history is a history of ass whoopings. No, you reject those people. We fought back. Charles Young says, I'm going to write a history of African civilizations. So he goes to Kano, and that's where he gets sick. He wasn't in the best of health, But he'd have been all right. Du Bois said he could have retired, but duty is what called him. His duty wasn't just to the country, his duty was to us. And so Charles Young makes transition. His wife, Ada, is 16 years younger than him. They adopted a son, Reginald Quata. As I said, he never makes it back to the United States alive. His mother remarried William Lowry. I think it was 1910. But Ada makes transition in 1953. She never quite recovers. The children are fascinating. Charles Young Jr. Well, he's not Charles Young Jr. His name is Charles Noel Young. Noel? That's interesting. Prof, and we're about to wind up in a second. Why would they name a child Noel? What day you think he was born?
Christmas.
1906, Christmas Day. Nickname Tauntaun. His daddy then his daddy got sent to Haiti. So Tauntaun and his mom Ada go live in Haiti. He lived in Haiti. Then he lived in the Philippines. That's when his sister was born, Marie Amelia. They call her Kiki. She was born in 1909. She was born in the Philippines. The two black children, and y'all know any of y'all military brat kids, y'all move around. Haiti, Tauntaun was born. Kiki, she was born in the Philippines. Tauntaun with them. So they move, they go around, they end up in Wyoming for a while, which is interesting. Wilberforce, then they back to Wilberforce at the house. Then they moved to Liberia. Remember the first time when Charles Young went to Liberia, and then they are school age. They went to get education in Belgium and France. Now, when Charles Young passes, now they ain't got no money. Du Bois, the whole black community, and basically everybody fighting the damn United States Army because they were going to give her a widow's pension. They said, you need to give her full pension. Y'all sent this man out to die. They agreed to raise it a little bit, but she never got no money. So Ada had to struggle. They had a little bit of land in Wilberforce for the farm. She struggled one way or the other for the rest of her life. Du Bois was furious. She lived in 1953, y'all. So when you go to the cemetery, you see Charles Young makes transition in 22. She passes in 53. Her children are buried. We just went there. I was standing there with Kathy Adams, Dr. Adams. We were standing there last week in the cemetery of Massey's Creek. There are a series of hedges, and between the hedges, you see Charles and you see Marie. The children are there, but they're not buried there because they died early. They're buried there because when they came back to the United States, Du Bois said you got to bring them back from Europe. They can't continue to study in Europe. Charles grows up, gets a master's from Ohio State University in agriculture and languages because he wanted to work the land. Self-determination. Very interesting, Charles Young. And then he taught at Central State University. He made transition. He was 60 years old, 1967. Marie Amelia, she got married where she had a child. She made transition in 1970. She was born in the Philippines, as I said. She got her bachelor's degree in Ohio at Wittenberg University. Some of y'all know where Wittenberg is. And got her master's here in D.C., a Catholic. Interestingly enough, she was a professor of French and music, taught for many years at Wilberforce until her sudden transition in 1970. But she started her career not at Wilberforce, but at Jackson State. When I saw that, I said, let me listen. I went and pulled my history. I got it around somewhere. History of Jackson State. She's mentioned one time, 1940-41, she's hired as a professor at Jackson State. I'm not quite sure how long she stayed. So those of you down there in at Jackson State, I love, y'all look up her, because in the history of Jackson State, she is narrated as Marie Y. Ware. So if you don't know the Y is for Young, you wouldn't know that Charles Young's daughter, Charles and Ada Young's daughter, was a professor at Jackson State. And of course, they're buried there in Wilberforce. So I'm gonna end with this. When we were all together Wednesday with Professor Black, Bob Omatosho, and he was reading Black on Black, and everybody was there. I got out the train. I got on train here, and I rode through DC, and then got out at Anacostia. Potentially the blackest stop on the DC Metro. I'm coming up out the train, and I'm hearing sirens. I get up to the top, and they have closed off one of the exits. It's about 8 police cars, the fire trucks, black people just walking around like nothing. And I'm seeing all these cops walking around, and they running, walking around. They chasing somebody there. And I walked a short couple of blocks up Martin Luther King Avenue, past the big chair to busboys and poets to go in to see my brother. And as I'm coming in, I'm seeing Nubians. It's a beautiful thing. Carr, hey, what's going on? Y'all over there? We can't get in. I can get in now. But, I'm going to stand in the corner if I have to. It was hot as hell, but that's a beautiful thing. I like the heat. I wore a long sleeve shirt to Arlington 85 degrees. Anyway, but the point is this. When in that experience, I thought about who we are to each other. And so as we kind of get into the summer now, perhaps we can spend a block of time this summer with some differently imagined weeks and pre-recorded stuff. I mean, I want to maybe think about summer school. I was thinking about summer school a lot walking around in Arlington. What would summer school look like? Maybe a little bit more like slowing down and rethinking, revisiting some of the things we've talked about. Some intellectual CSIs, I like to call it, crime scene investigations, because that's what Arlington National Cemetery is. It's a crime scene. That's why I used to tell my nephew, when we went out there, he's like, yeah, man, this is a crime scene. We're going to go out to the crime scene. And my girl, Shanice Thompson, Professor Thompson now, when she was a park ranger out there, the park rangers, the United States Park Service, I have to, mention them and thank them. There are a number of people who, I could thank, but I want to mention, from last week, Angela Stewart, her husband, Robert. Angela Stewart is one of the sisters who keeps watch at the Paul Lawrence Dunbar House, Park Ranger, National Park Service. Thank you, Angela, for spending time with us last week and to walk us and narrate us through. She also was the person who coordinated the 100th anniversary of Paul Lawrence Dunbar's birth. And just a remarkable memory keeper, a jolly. Her husband, Robert, has been reassigned. He was over the Charles Young house, which is now the Charles Young National Buffalo Soldiers Monument. It's being redone there in Wilberforce. That's where Charles Young and Ada Young were. Her mother-in-law, his mother, Arminta, their children lived there, Charles, and then Charles Noel, and of course Amelia before she got married, Young, where Young's home, as it was called, it is now the Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. Brother Robert was there. He's now at Fort McHenry. That's what Angela told us last Saturday. So I got to go up the road to see him in Baltimore. And if y'all go by Fort McHenry National Monument, understand there's a brother there, Robert Stewart, good brother. Before the Stewarts were in Wilberforce, and Robert was over the Young home, was our sister, our dear sister, Kennard, Dr. Joy Kennard. Joy Kennard is now the National Park Service Ranger in charge of the Selma to Montgomery route and also Tuskegee. Her father, John Kennard, was the founder of the first Black museum in the Smithsonian, which still exists, the Anacostia Neighborhood Community Museum, which is why when I said I came out the ground of the Metro at Anacostia, as I bring it back to a close, it's the Blackest Stop. It's right up the street from Frederick Douglass's house. It's in the heart of Southeast Anacostia. And as I was walking there, I was thinking who we are to each other is very different than who we are to the social structure. And for every foray into attempting to make this place something other than what it is, which is aspirational, and I embrace as an aspiration of our common humanity, we must never forget that if we're going to cite facts, some of these things are going to be irreconcilable. We built this country, so you want to be part of the settler enterprise? If not, you better speak up, because these people will take your memories and make them their memories. And if that happens, then you can never build the kind of society you want to be in, because you've still allowed that violence, that settler violence, that anti-human violence to be part of your story too. What are your objectives? You talk about reparations, the first step in repair is self-repair. And you cannot repair by holding on to that lie. Right, see. Well, I'm gonna stop, but there he is, Prof. I mean, you know what? I want to say this very quickly. Y'all go do this research for yourself. Go find a picture. There's one picture I've seen of Charles Young's mother. She is beautiful. She is so beautiful. I mean, like this ebony color, his father. There's one picture of him in his uniform. He got his little medal on, United States color troops. I swear that boy looked like his mother. She's got that same intense stare. That brother right there, he could have been in the army of the Egyptians. He got
that I wish you would energy. And every he's standing akimbo, right? Like I wish you would. And
I wish you would.
As you were talking about him, I was thinking what it must be like to be born in the 1860s, because this is the journey that I take every day that I get to sit in community with you. Is like, what would I have been in the 1860s? He was born 1864. what would that have been to be in an army where the assault, verbal, physical. You talking about going to West Point? This man went to the kind of determination that it would take. I think about that with W.B. Du Bois to actually go through college and then have to start all over again to go to Harvard to prove a point, not to yourself.
That's right.
To let them know, and that at every turn, as that baton gets passed, you and I sit on the shoulders of these folk that took the L's but didn't, kept going, got to the other side. We don't have nothing to complain about.
Nothing. But we have everything to remember, right?
Yes.
That's a beautiful picture. I mean, like you say, now, when people do the right thing, in other words, they promoted this man to Brigadier General. If they have 50 stars that can go on a general's shoulders, he should have had all 50.
Oh.
And now you giving his descendant a flag with 1 star. Let me just be very clear about this. These people in this social structure are not doing these things to honor these people. They're doing it to splay Lysol on their lie. If you was going to make Charles Young a general, it should have been when Black Jack Pershing said make him a general. You wait 100 years. See, we're finally correcting a wrong. You can't correct a wrong. Is he alive? Du Bois said, you sent this man to Africa to die, and he went. Why? Because he had a duty to Africa. Y'all don't know this man, but if you look at him, every Black person know who that man is right there. That is the weary face of anybody who has ever seen an elder come home from work. Mm-hmm. That is the work. I'm tired, but I am undefeated. People say, oh, he rode his horse from Wilberforce to Washington, D.C. No. When you get into the details, you understand the only break he took was so that the horse could get a break. Do you understand that? This man's horse was named Blacksmith. He lived in the world. You look him in the face, you're right. Not only do we stand on his shoulders, we owe him a duty. Why? Because he had parents, and they had parents, and they had parents. And watch this, they had parents. 1619, you start in 1619 BC? Why are you starting this story with that damn boat? This man's determination was born in the spirit of the blood that commingled for the first human that walked the earth. And he spent his life trying to get back that story. He died in Nigeria because he went to Kano, to work on his book. Why is he there? Is that an American? No, the Americans sent me to Lagos. I'm going to Kano because I want to read. I want to repair. I want us to know who we are. Charles Young said, I see what the Garvey movement's trying to do, but they're going to need money to beat these white boys. You know how you know that? Because I know these boys better than anybody. I'm the tip of the spear. I done chased Pancho Villa. I was down there when they was invading Haiti. I went to damn Philippines when they had them in them jacked up schools trying to teach them English. And Carter Woodson was like, you need to learn your own history. Du Bois was my man. We were sitting in Wilberforce when Du Bois sent a copy of Blackwater. He said, thank you for sending me this copy of your book because I am its father. That was the joke. He said, we used to sit and talk about this stuff. And so when he died, Du Bois cut up so bad in New York at the ceremony that the white boy from the army came up and tried to offer rebuttal and then apologized to Ada for, I'm sorry, I felt like I had to say something. Because Du Bois was like, no, I'm here. Y'all not going to talk. When Charles Young's body made it to Washington, D.C., the brothers came and got him, took him to Arlington Cemetery. 5,000 people showed up at the funeral, and the Black schools of Washington took the day off as a holiday. And for years after that, this man's birthday, the day of that ritual, were holidays. And here we are in 2021. And if you say the name Charles Young to 10 Black people, 10 of them are going to be like, who are you talking about? This is what we do every Saturday, Professor Hunter. We're going to enter some summer school and do some work. But yeah. You picked the right picture, though. This is him.
Yeah. And then we got to get into 2 years, 2023, because I know we are still stuck in some other places. You said 22 and 2021.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, because we did lose 2 years. So I feel like our ages, nothing happened for 2 years. So claim all of that.
Woo! Claim it all. Love you.
I love you too. I'll see you in the Nubian streets, y'all. And thank you. Monday, office hours. Tomorrow, Maroon's Medicine Chest. We just added a mental health component as well. Dr. Narisa is joining us through an African lens, dealing with our mental health, which I love. You know, we talk about the repair.
Yes.
Starts with us. So we're going to help there. Yes.
I should mention one transition this week. This sister, filmmaker, first Black woman documentarian. Some people narrate her as that. She was definitely the first Black woman who was a part of the Camera Women's Union. That is, of course, the great Jessie Maple. She made transition this week. This is one of her 2 biographies called The Maple Crew. Jessie Maple. Y'all look up Jessie Maple because this is a name we don't hear. We start talking about Hollywood. We start talking about network television. We start talking about camera. This is a sister who was behind the camera and also a documentarian, a filmmaker. She made transition. So I want to lift that sister up.
Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the genealogy. You know, sometimes people get frustrated because we're not used to sitting and hearing, but you don't utter a name without then telling us who begat them. And those of you who love your Bible, there's like a whole damn chapter on begats.
That's right.
Let's appreciate, because none of us got here by ourselves. So that you are the people that birthed the people that we're talking about, I think is super powerful, and it also gives us breadcrumbs to go follow. Yes. So thank you for that.
Y'all be safe and love you.
Love you too. All right, Nubians.
See y'all.